Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Extra Serving, a podcast from Nation's Restaurant News. I am Sam Oches, editor-in-chief of NRN. Today, we are back from Thanksgiving break. It's a slow time of year for the restaurant industry, but not a slow time of year for the consumer, and we will get into that. Also going to talk about Subway and their CEO transition, and talk about catering and some other opportunities to increase profitability in the year ahead. Once again, as always, joined by my colleague, executive editor, Alicia Kelso. Alicia, hello.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Alicia, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.
Did we wager?
This, we should have. We should have wagered in drinks owed to each other, perhaps. No real dollar amounts, because look, I am, as a Cleveland sports fan and Ohioan, I am eternally nihilistic, I think is probably the way to say it. I expect to lose always. And I said last week, don't be surprised if Ohio State loses. And you were like, no way, they're never going to, there's no way they could lose to this team. And they did. And in honor of you, I've put blue on my light here for those who are watching. You know me, I'm not the kind to cry about it. I'm a cynic, first and foremost, when it comes to sports. So I just kind of move on with my life. However, this city, Columbus, is not doing that. So, Alicia, tell me about how your experience watching the game and the elation you felt.
We beat a $20 million roster with a walk-on quarterback. I can't believe it. I drank way too much champagne. I'm on my second day of hangover. I'm too old. I can't metabolize champagne.
That's strong.
Oh, yeah, we went for it. Because, there's a funny TikTok that goes around about how fans, I'm on the team. Oh. I'm on the team. And so that's pretty much how that's how I was treating myself on Saturday. That it was shocking. And my mom was in town, and I still can't believe it. And I'll take it. It's fun. I don't want to gloat, but I appreciated the upset. And
if you want to gloat to anybody, I'm the right person to gloat to.
We had a pretty, Cinderella story on Saturday with most of our stars were hurt. We did have a walk-on quarterback, and we're not here to talk about football, but go blue.
It's fair. And as I said before we hit record, I am more in favor of the underdog than anything, because I am, again, Cleveland sports fan, eternal underdog. So I am okay with the scenario. The 4 in a row is pretty brutal. That's the one thing, because when OSU won, they won 7 in a row before this, or 6 or 7 or something.
Urban was 7-0 versus us.
Urban was 7-0. So when that was going on, I made the mistake of saying, you know what, I wish Michigan would win once in a while, because it would actually make this rivalry competitive and interesting. But 4 in a row, I didn't want that. Last thing I'll say too. Rivalries should be fun. Rivalries should be collegial, and I think we should have conversations like this. I was very upset to see the fight at the end when the two teams went at it, and there was pepper spray used. Come on, guys! Like let's just look to next year. Try to win next year. Come on, this is sports. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
I'll save my opinions. I don't like flag planting, but I think it's part of the game now, unfortunately. And you got to take the loss. You got to go to the locker room. It happened twice against Michigan this year, and there was no scuffle. But
respect to the Texas coach who got his team off.
He didn't do that in Ann Arbor when I was up there. By the way, they planted the flag right in front of me, and I teared up a little bit.
Yeah. It's just silly. It's sports, people. The last thing I'll say, having lived in Durham, North Carolina for 12 years, I like the Duke UNC rivalry because the schools are 8 miles apart. And so literally everybody are neighbors. And that's how we should treat this. We're all neighbors. We can all appreciate each other. Anyway, let's move on. Let's talk about the restaurant industry. Well, I guess I should say, Alicia, how was your Thanksgiving? Did you have a good Thanksgiving?
That's the only thing that matters.
You're like, Thanksgiving.
My mom was in town. That was lovely. And we went to see Jack Harlow. He's from Louisville. For some a black tie kind of event with the orchestra on Friday. That was lovely.
That's cool.
It was nice. It was nice to step away for a couple of days and not have breaking news flying into my inbox. I wish every weekend we could have, a 3-day work week. So if you could make that happen, I would really appreciate that.
I'll see what I can do. I'll work with the powers that be and see if we can do anything about that. Well, here's the good news, Alicia, is that Thanksgiving's so great because it's a break, but it's not then with the year ahead of you, like Christmas, the end of Christmas, you're coming out of that just depressed because the holidays are over and you've got the whole year ahead of you. we've only got 3 weeks ahead of us. This is a generally fairly slow time for the restaurant industry, as everybody sort of sets their attention on the year ahead, on the busy consumer for the next couple of weeks. We'll get into how busy they were this weekend. But first, I would say the biggest piece of news coming out of last week, of course, Subway CEO John Chidsey announced he would retire to be replaced on an interim basis by President of Europe, Middle East and Africa, Carrie Walsh. This is big news, if only because it's a top 10 restaurant company that will be changing leadership. And, that is always a good or bad thing for a company. Rarely is that a very average thing, because with a new CEO comes new strategy, new direction, new energy, new ideas, hopefully. Subway certainly could use some of those. Alicia, what do you make of, well, let's start with, what do you make of John Chidsey's tenure? He was CEO for 5 years. What do you think of the last 5 years for Subway?
I think everybody who's been a CEO for 5 years deserves to retire happily, because that means that they guided the restaurant company through the pandemic. And, kudos to him. He came in under some strange circumstances, the chain's first CEO, from outside of the founding family. And we know how weird it can get when the family speaks a certain language. I would say that he did help lead a sort of a multi-year turnaround for Subway. Subway was hemorrhaging stores before he came. It's well documented both in our publication and elsewhere. I think they closed like 2,000 stores in like 3 or 4 years. I mean,
they're up to 7,000 from their peak, I believe.
Okay. So,
but that's been over several years.
I think that was over 10 years. So we're talking about the biggest restaurant company in the world by footprint that went through a significant retrenchment prior to him coming on board. And, so he had a kind of a daunting task at hand, is to sort of stop that bleeding. I think you and I don't want to speak for you, but I think we would agree there needed to be a significant retrenchment. Yeah. The story of Subway is that it just cannibalized each other, and to the detriment of its average unit volumes, which are still, kind of pretty low by industry standards. I think they're about $500,000. And so what's interesting about that is when he came on board, he wanted to sort of get away from the single unit operator. He wanted to get away from that, that whole strategy that got the company into that over cannibalizing circumstance in the first place, just having, franchise agreements to anybody who was willing to put the down payment down and get to a little bit, multi-unit, savvier operators. It was a good idea on paper. We didn't, in the 5 years, though, since he implemented that, we haven't seen the AUV needle move as much as I thought. So I think that's how deep of a problem this is sort of become for Subway. And one could argue that those low average unit volumes are the reason that multi-unit operators sort of weren't running to the concept in droves to open up big groups of restaurants. That said, they've still signed thousands of restaurant agreements globally. They've undergone significant amount of changes, notably on the menu, tons of refreshes in its stores, and really undergoing a lot of digital transformation to try and modernize the brand. There's a lot of work to do on this brand, and I think he at least got a decent foundation put into place to get some of that work started. And we'll see where it goes from here. But he did, I think, what he could in 5 years.
Yeah, I agree. And what is unfortunate for him is that the fruits of his labor may come further down the road. Subway may yet experience some of the benefits of the decisions he made later, because that it was such a big task that you're not going to snap your fingers and make a system of 20,000 plus restaurants in the United States just improve right away. And so the work they've been putting in is work that they're looking at the long term. And that includes that retrenchment, right? That has to include closing underperforming locations, weeding out some bad franchisees, because of course, a few of the biggest issues, I would say, first off, franchisee relations. Subway has always had a very tenuous relationship, partly because of that fact that they did a lot of onesie twosie deals with franchisees. And then they had the system of something like 10,000 franchisees, and that's untenable. You can't, how do you have a relationship with 10,000 individual franchise groups? The vast majority of restaurant companies don't even have that many locations, and they had that many franchisees. When you have that many franchisees, the franchisees end up being just a number, and yes. You're a number in a system. You're not a face and a name. And so that was a big part of the problem, which, to your point, I think is why they want to move away from that onesie twosie model and get to some bigger franchise groups. The other problem is competition. I mean, look at last week we were talking about Jersey Mike's and the mega deal they scored with Blackstone and the potential Jersey Mike's still has ahead of it. Jersey Mike's has 3,000 locations now doing $4 billion in sales. It is not crazy to say that in a couple of years, Jersey Mike's sales could surpass Subway, like maybe even in 2 to 3 years. Then you have Firehouse Subs, you have Jimmy John's. And so you have these other competitors that came in on a quality message. They were able to compete against Subway by saying, we have better sandwiches. And America said, oh, yeah, those are better sandwiches and still kind of at a value. Now, one of the other big changes that you alluded to that John Chidsey made is the menu refresh. I think this was a big positive move for Subway that, again, I think over time will help, where they went to the signature menu item model. And I personally appreciate that because I'm lazy and I don't like to have to build my own thing. I want to go there. I want that one. They went to that model. To your point, no real evidence that it drove a sales increase. But I think it helped to modernize the menu for Subway. I think it helped certainly to convert to digital a little bit more easily. And it was probably a lot more helpful during the pandemic when all sales were digital. So these were very positive moves. But again, when you have the competition they have still a lot of poor performing restaurants. The joke was that there's a Subway across the street from a Subway. Still kind of the case in a lot of instances. And so there probably will be further entrenchment as they right size their real estate strategy and their franchisee strategy. In the long run, I think could really benefit. Now, what do we make? We don't know a whole lot about Carrie Walsh, the interim CEO. The first thing I would say that I'm sure you agree with is wouldn't mind if she got that permanent tag to have another woman in the CEO position. She is currently the highest ranking CEO, woman CEO currently in the restaurant industry. Any other thoughts about the job she's coming into?
Sure. She's got the pedigree. Obviously, she has a Yum background, which most, if not, many, many executives in the restaurant industry and other brands sort of do. I think it's obviously yet to be seen. I don't know what direction they're going to go into again, because Chidsey was the first non-family member. And so I think where Walsh's fate sort of rests right now is what happens with the Rourke ownership. And that's, arguably the biggest piece of news from Subway in the past, perhaps it's a recent history, is this retirement announcement wasn't a terrible surprise. They just closed that deal earlier this year for nearly $10 billion, which is huge, the biggest, I believe, in restaurant industry. And so whenever a deal like that happens, it's time to sort of roll out of the leadership that facilitated or helped facilitate that deal. So what Walsh's role will play here, I think, will be dependent on what Rourke's intentions are with the brand. And I don't have a crystal ball for that. We'll certainly see. But she, like I said, she's got the pedigree. She knows the system. Subway is moving very earnestly into into its global footprint. Perhaps because of the competition domestically, perhaps because, it did over cannibalize and retrench domestically. How much more space is left for Subway in the U.S.? So I think having that global experience that she has will be a benefit ultimately in the near term, at least. And then where it goes from here is again, they've got to get their restaurant profitability in check before we have a serious conversation about the potential here. They've got the brand, obviously, but, going back to that point about value and franchisee relations, I mean, that has been a thorn in Subway's side for over a decade. And I don't think they've figured it out right now, even still in a value environment, until they move the needle on those AUVs. I think things are going to be a little bit stagnant for the brand.
Yeah, it's a great point about value, because I'm inclined to say that's what they should lean into. They should lean into being a value-oriented brand, because they can still own that against Jersey Mike's, Jimmy John's, Firehouse Subs. Now, those brands by no means are overly expensive, but Subway continues to have the sort of value positioning against those brands, I would say. But it's interesting, if you look at Subway and the history of value at Subway, almost 2 decades of $5 footlong that now they're trying to get away from. They had the $6.99 deal that they just ended because it wasn't really doing very well. So in an age where McDonald's is thriving on $5 meal deal and launching their McValue menu, Subway's still trying to figure out what is their value position, certainly in their marketing message today. And the second thing I would say they could lean into, and I say this with a little bit of an eye roll, is the health component. You and I both came into this industry in 2009, and you might remember, Alicia, around that time, Subway used to win awards every year for perceived healthiest brands to consumers. And I have to say, as somebody who spent many years driving back and forth between North Carolina and Ohio, it 100% was when my wife and I would say, what do you want to do for lunch? Wendy's? I like Wendy's, but I'm feeling something a little bit healthier. Let's do Subway. That's, that a lot of America, that's the decision is, do you want a burger, a taco, or a sandwich? And the sandwich, if you're feeling a little bit more in a healthier mood, that's what you go for. Again, a little bit of an eye roll, because we all know that it's really nuanced and not totally a healthy thing, but it's a health halo. Whether or not they can maintain a halo in today's day and age when you have Sweetgreen, you have other health-oriented brands, I don't know. But I think between health and value, Subway has an opportunity here maybe to play with some of these things that its competitors don't. And I think in 2025, that maybe that's the direction they go in. Yeah. But we'll see. Okay. All right, Alicia, let's talk about catering. You just wrote a story about catering. Specifically, let's talk about catering as it relates to the four-wall profitability. We've, of course, been through a couple years of inflation, rising costs, consumers finally saying that's enough. So traffic plunges, restaurants working on the traffic piece of this with their marketing. Now they set their sight on the future, 2025 profitability. How do we, because they took a hit on that when they went to value and discounting in order to get the customers back. If and when the customers are back, which could be sooner rather than later, hopefully, how do you then increase your profitability and turn things around so that you can start making money again? You wrote a story arguing that catering could be a good opportunity to do that. Tell me more about why catering.
I did write a story about this, but it was before the Thanksgiving holiday, so details are a little foggy.
Catering? I wrote a story about catering.
I turned my brain off for a few days. No, so what's interesting here is about 2 years ago, I started noticing more public brands talking about catering on earnings calls and during their presentations, during interviews with private companies that were bigger as well, like Freddy's starting to test it, and just sort of going a little bit deeper into, focusing on catering. And there's obviously really good reason for that. And now that it's the holiday season, catering is top of mind for consumers hosting holiday parties, businesses hosting, office events. And now that there's a sort of a bigger return to office focus too, for many companies, including big ones like Amazon, catering is a huge part of the conversation once again, and not just for these bigger public brands. But what I've noticed in my inbox is, especially during the past several months, is catering is something that is being embraced by smaller brands, less than 50 units, and a lot of independents too. And so taking a deeper dive, talking to some of these brands like Killer Burger, like Angry Chicks, and the why, the why is really, really obvious, because you can optimize your labor when the store is closed for orders that are way more profitable than during regular business hours. And more, like I said, more companies are embracing catering because that's their incentive to bring companies back. So it's sort of a virtuous cycle in that way for the operators and for the businesses, especially that leverage catering. Why it matters now is a much deeper conversation. And you and I have both been having, several conversations with our sources on the importance of franchisee profitability, because it has just been decimated in the past several years with margin pressures, with this value, this value environment that we're in, simultaneously, while labor costs are 25, 30% higher than they were since 2020. Food costs are still up significantly. They're moderating a little bit, but they're still up significantly. And of course, debt is still, super expensive, which is why I'm writing about bankruptcies more than I would really like to be writing about. So margins are taking a hit. Catering is a way to sort of squeeze more of that four-wall profitability out of your operation, with all of those, simultaneous factors working against you. It versus growing just for growth's sake. I think the industry sort of got carried away with overgrowth. That's why we're seeing a big retrenchment now. We talked about it at Subway, but that's hard. That's just the tip of the iceberg. And just sort of correcting itself on size and to get the profitability, the average unit volumes and the margins back up to where they need to go before we should be having a conversation about growth and expansion. And again, I think catering is a really, I don't want to say low-hanging fruit because it requires work, but it's a low-hanging fruit in terms of your brand awareness is already there. Your labor optimization is there. The technology is there in a way that it wasn't there 5 years ago, so you can figure out inventory and all that other stuff that comes with catering, the logistics and so on and so forth. So I think it's just a really intriguing conversation that we've seen such a huge growth in this revenue channel for especially the past 3 years. And to reiterate, what intrigues me is it's not just the big companies doing it anymore. We now have a new competition in catering across the board, from the big chains to independents, jockeying for top of mind awareness on who's going to get to the table at the, in the boardroom, or the table at the holiday party at the neighbor's house.
Yeah, a couple of points off of that. I would say the first point, being you're spot on about the fact that logistically catering today is easier than it's ever been to launch a catering platform. There are more companies out there ready to set you up for catering success than there ever have been. And the digital ordering piece of this, I think, is something that shouldn't be forgotten. That customers should be able to easily access your catering through a digital platform, via your website, through a white labeled third party, whatever. But the fact of the matter is that it's easier than ever for a customer to access catering options because of technology. And it's easier than ever for a restaurant to facilitate a catering order because of technology. It's much more efficient and less labor intensive. I think you mentioned that than ever before because of these tech platforms. So now more than ever, you are set up for success with catering. I would also say, you mentioned, that boardroom lunch, working from home, never going to go away, thankfully, for my sake and your sake.
I'm glad you said that.
As far as we know, if the show disappears, you'll know why. But it's likely to decrease in its prevalence. Certainly, more companies are at least requiring employees come back for a few days a week, if not full time. Some of the major companies have now started to say, we want you back in an office full time. And with more employees going back to work, and honestly, let's face it, even if they're not going back to an office, maybe they're going to a co-working place. I have a co-working place here in Columbus, and they have catering from time to time. So the fact of the matter is, employees, workers, people are out and about more often in places where catering makes sense. And, customers have higher expectation for food quality. As they increase their expectation for food quality, they're going to look beyond that, not to rip on them, but they're going to look past Panera. You look at a Panera that has done very well with catering. Chipotle has done very well with catering, and fine options, certainly. But maybe people want something new, different, more adventurous. And I think that's where the opportunity lies. So if you're an independent restaurant, if you're a small chain, certainly if you have a little bit more of a, different, higher quality, whatever menu than some of the bigger chains, you've got a message to come out and say, hey, you've had enough sandwiches and burritos for your catering. Why not Indian? Why not, Mediterranean? Why not something a little bit more adventurous? Because customers, again, are embracing those kinds of foods. And it's not odd to see that as the boardroom lunch versus sandwiches. Finally, I'll say catering is a great marketing tool. Think of how many people at that holiday festival, at that boardroom lunch, at that whatever, who haven't experienced your brand before, and suddenly catering puts your food right in front of them and they go, oh my gosh, I've never had this before. I need to go check it out. I will say as one example, here locally in Columbus, there's a bakery cafe concept called Fox in the Snow. I believe they have 4 locations. And excuse me, pastries are one of their specialties. And my sister catered a party once and got their pastries. I had never had it before. I had never heard of it before. And their pastries just absolutely blew me away. And then I sought out their restaurant to go experience it in person, which I did and loved it. So, that's a very small example of what is possible with catering, which is using catering as a marketing tool to get in front of a massive amount of people. Yep. And we all know marketing into 2025 is still going to be very, very important to get customers to come back, to get your traffic back. So just to reiterate what you're saying, Alicia, I just think catering makes a lot of sense. And I don't want to pretend like you snap your fingers and you've got a catering platform. It takes some work and it takes certainly some cost. But I think if you can do this right and with the right partners, you will find that it can be extremely profitable and a great way to generate some new traffic.
Well, and to your point, to find, to sort of put a bow on it, I do think there is the potential challenge here, like you mentioned, that you have to cut through the noise with marketing, especially because everybody and their brother is now catering. I mean, Crumble jumped into catering, just last week, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And so everybody is dipping their toe in catering because of the benefits, which if I put them on paper, the pro list is much longer than the con list, but with more brands and independents and everybody else ramping up their programs and sharpening their focus on catering, the noise is going to become really too loud to bear. So how do you cut through it and make sure that you're top of mind for the office and make sure that it's not just, I want to try something different. There's just so many options now, and that continues to grow. And so that's the one major challenge that I see is if you're thinking about jumping into catering or getting a catering program off the ground, you got to know what makes you different than, the concept down the street jumping into catering too. So, I think that's the one major challenge that I see going forward. And you got to price it right too, of course.
For sure.
I can't just squeeze out catering just because it's higher orders and more profitability, because then you will not be top of mind against the increased competition in the space.
Absolutely. All right. So 2025 customers are going to be more interested in trying some new foods. Hopefully catering can be one of those things that gets their attention and drives them into restaurants. We want to talk about more things that customers are going to be interested in 25. What are some consumer trends that we should be looking out for in the year ahead? We are going to enter now our extra serving portion of this episode to talk about consumer trends. I'm going to continue to draw this out until she shows up. Managing editor Leigh Anne Zinsmeister. Leigh Anne, welcome to Extra Serving.
Hey, thanks.
Leigh Anne, we're going to talk about consumer trends, but first, we just talked about catering in offices. You are joining us now live from the New York office. What was the last catered meal that our office does? A lot of catering, credit to them. What was the last thing they catered into the office?
Yeah, they do a decent amount. I think the last one was tacos. We do a good mix of catering where you order your own meal in advance. They say, we're ordering from this restaurant next week. Tell us what you want. And catering of we're bringing in, trays and trays of taco fillings. Fill up your taco. Tacos. We had pizza actually recently. I don't know if that counts as catering if you just get
I can't argue with that.
Pizzas delivered, but yeah, Yeah, we do have a good amount of catering in here. Bagels on the regular.
I mean, catering makes a lot of sense with something like pizza and bagels, where you can very easily serve them in mass. It's not too confusing. I had a friend who ran a pizza restaurant near the hospital here in Columbus, right by Ohio State. And I think the vast majority of his sales were just sending out like a stack of 10 boxes to that hospital basically every week for the doctors and nurses. Maybe not the healthiest thing to do, but hey, I mean, it's a very easy way to get a lot of food, is order a large pizza, and there you go. You can feed lots of people. Okay, before we get into consumer trends, Leigh Anne, too, what was your favorite thing you did over the Thanksgiving break? How was your break?
Oh, I had a great break. The best thing I did was I went to see a new Broadway musical called Maybe Happy Ending on Friday night. So that was fun. Also, I'm sure you've already talked about football, but my ASU Sun Devils absolutely creamed the Wildcats.
There was football this weekend?
There's a reason I got blue on it above my head there, Leigh Anne. Oh, boy.
Anyway, yeah, it was a great weekend.
Good. Okay. Well, at least somebody.
And they stuck their what is it? The Sun Devil thing?
Did they plant the flag or trident?
The pitchfork.
Pitchfork.
I've compromised some.
Football has gotten very violent. Well, okay. Before I get that
about
again.
My college experience, and my friends just go, "Oh, that explains a
lot." Yes, the things that football does to us. Okay, let's talk consumer trends, Leigh Anne. Of course, again, we were just talking about catering, and catering being a trend we should watch for in the year ahead.
Oh yeah.
Let's think about some other things that we should expect to see in the coming year, as far as what the consumer wants out of restaurants. Some trends that restaurants should be paying attention to for consumers. What's one that you would throw out there that you think is particularly important in the year ahead?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that consumers really love to save money.
They do.
Whether that's through value offerings or loyalty programs or some sort of combination of the two. Obviously, we saw a ton of that this year, and I don't think it's going away. So if you've been kind of trying to ride that out, it might be time to consider what your options might be in that department.
Yep.
Yeah. Other things, I mean, consumers are still on the go. It's been for almost 5 years of you got to feed a consumer who's just on the run all the time. And that is still true. So whether that's putting in drive-thrus, figuring out ways, menu items that can be eaten with one hand while someone is driving or talking on the phone, walking down the street in New York City. Those are trends that, I mean, we've been talking about for so long, but I just don't think they're going away. And we're still seeing brands jump onto them for the first time. So it's never too late.
Leigh Anne, all of those activities sound dangerous to do while eating.
I'm
eating
not
and driving.
The activity.
Eating and talking and not paying attention.
Do it anyway. They might as well eat your food and not the competitors.
You can also eat your food with one hand while sitting there doing nothing else. I'm just saying, you don't need both hands to eat.
The most common one is eating with one hand and just like having a phone in the other hand, not necessarily doing both of those things behind the wheel. But
I will say, I have done a fair amount of driving whilst eating with one hand and driving with one hand. I like to consider myself a good driver, so nobody get afraid or scared for my safety. I'm only doing it when we're on these vacations. Actually, the second time I talked about driving on the highway and looking for food. So fun times there. And I've got Katie next to me just like handing me things, and I'm like trying to do that, and I eat so fast because I'm like, I don't want to be driving with one hand and eating with the other. I just like shove it into my face, get back to two hands on the wheel. Anyway, I'm digressing. Both of those very good consumer trends. Alicia, what do you think are some trends in the year ahead that we should be watching out for?
I coincidentally just wrote about like an economic outlook for 2025. And I don't know. I don't think anybody can answer this right now. I think it's such an unusual environment. You know, we just saw a all-time high Black Friday.
Yep.
Spending wise, in sales up 10 on a retail side, 10.2% higher than last year. So obviously there's some confidence when it comes to the consumer, but traffic is still down in many segments in the restaurant industry, even though we did see sequential improvement, into Q4. I do think that Black Friday number bodes well for the restaurant industry. I also think it underscores an increasing bifurcation that we're seeing across the macro now. And when you hear the McDonald's CEO say that 2025 is going to continue to be a challenged year, and you see them extending not only their $5 meal deal, but launching an entire McValue platform in January, I think the environment is going to increasingly become bifurcated in the new year. And how that impacts restaurants is the ones that can figure out that barbell where they are offering the value that Leigh Anne spoke about. Yes, they want to save money. They are seeking value, but without compromising the profitability that Sam, you and I just talked about. McDonald's has done a dexterous job about this. They had their $5 meal deal while simultaneously promoting their chicken Big Mac at full price. So that has to be the priority here, is to get that sort of barbell equation right to maintain the profitability. And in terms of on the go, what I think is really interesting, that also seems all over the map to me. We do see consumers continue to eat and want that portability, that convenience. We saw Chipotle just double down on their growth plans with Chipotle because everybody wants to eat on the go, like you said. But we're also seeing an increased conversation in hospitality from the Kavas, and Bluestone Coffee, for example. Subway is another example, where Starbucks, where things became, quote, too transactional. And so we're seeing sort of the pendulum swing back toward the hospitality piece, the third place piece. And I think that everything is now an even bigger balance than it was before, both on the value side and on the convenience side.
Yeah, all great points. And to piggyback off of some of what you said, Alicia, about Black Friday being a record Black Friday. Well, first off, I would say it's interesting how that consumer confidence and optimism, it's interesting to see how much that could be. I don't want to say it's a mirage, and I don't want to say it's unmerited, but I guess I would say that a lot of it's in messaging. Let's say we come in after a couple weeks after an election where a lot of people were framing things about, what the direction will be and more optimism, et cetera, et cetera. Perhaps there is some inflated optimism there because of that. I don't know. We'll see if it carries into 2025. But what I'll say, and I'll use an example for my family from this weekend to talk about what I think will be a big consumer trend. So my family, my wife and two older children, went to Moana 2 on Friday. I stayed behind with the baby because I went and saw Wild Robot with the older two. So we're switching off. That's how we're making this work. You guys didn't need all those details, but I'm giving them to you anyway. This is my family. Okay, so they went and saw Moana 2 at a theater here by our house that it's usually pretty sleepy. It was packed, and you might have followed the news, but Moana just broke like every single record that there was in the box office. It made $220 million over the long weekend. Basically, every child in America had to go see that movie. And if you know anything about children, Alicia, which you do, you know that Moana is a mega hit among kids. I read that last year, 2023, most streamed movie on any platform, Moana 1. Thus leading to the success of Moana 2. I'm getting to my point here. Just give me a second because I see Leigh Anne starting to roll her eyes. So Moana 2 was initially developed as a TV show for Disney Plus back in the middle of the pandemic. And back when we all thought movie theaters are dead, nobody's going to go to a movie theater anymore because now you can get all the things right away on a streaming platform. And then after a little while, COVID started to disappear. People started going back to the movie theater, and Disney said, forget that. We're going to make some money on this thing. And they took this concept of a TV show and made it into a movie, which is Moana 2. Now, arguably, if you read any of the reviews or my family, not as good as Moana 1, probably for that reason. It started as a show, then it became a movie. The point here is this. I think people do want experiences, but I think we have to hesitate and say, not jump to pickleball. Let's not go there. Let's not say it's all about entertainment when we say experiences. But I do think people want to be out of their home and get a unique experience. And that could affect how restaurants can, Alicia, to your point, provide some profitability, hospitality. And Leigh Anne, even to your point, how do you improve the experience of the off-premises channels, which will not go away? I just had a conversation with Peter Newlin of Gastamo Group on my podcast Takeaway. Go listen to it. We had a really great conversation about their Denver-based hospitality group. And he made this really interesting point, which was about the concept of Gen Z and experiences. And he was saying that he and his wife go to lots of concerts and they've seen a lot of the biggest hits. And let's just use Taylor Swift and Eras as a good example, because I know I'm in the right room for that. So you two experienced the Eras tour, and how much it wasn't even just about her and the music, right? It was about the experience of being with all the other Swifties. It was about the, I don't know, wristbands or whatever you guys had that you waved and it made colors all
bracelets.
over. Friendship bracelets. Sorry. Well, what was it that made the light?
We had wristbands too, Alicia, that they gave out at the stadium.
Thank you. Okay. Whoa. I realize I'm not as big a fan as you guys, but I know a little bit about Taylor Swift. So come on. But the point that Peter made in our conversation, and using Eras as the example, is that it's the not just the music that you go to a concert. It's not just a band on stage. They play the songs and you go along. It is the whole experience of the show. Alicia, Sphere is a great example of that too. You saw U2 at the Sphere, and it was an experience. It wasn't just music. So I'm just going to use that to say experience is going to be big for restaurants in the year ahead, not just for Gen Z. I think older generations, of course, we appreciate experiences as well. But it might be more and more important as Gen Z expects a lot of bells and whistles for things like concerts. Perhaps that translates to restaurants. And again, it doesn't have to mean put a pickleball in your restaurant, and no disrespect to the pickleball concepts, because they have their place. It is mostly just to say, I think when we say experience and we ratchet that up to 11, it jumps to entertainment. It can be in the hospitality. It can be in the service. It doesn't have to be the big thing. So anyway, that's my prediction for consumer trend. Do you guys? I mean, you guys.
I think it's a good point, and it, just to your point of this is an expectation for Gen Z. That can't be understated, and we're talking about the biggest generation with the most wealth that will ever come through as an American consumer. And so their expectations are very much important here. And they're used to, that's why digital is so critical, because they are used to Amazon. They're used to on demand. They're digital natives. And that's, I think that's trickling to every other. You said older generations like me, and I giggled though.
Like us.
I'm a Sphere goer at Gen X, which is older than you. And
you go to Sphere.
So yeah, I have influence from the Gen Z kids too.
Let's face it, Alicia, you and I are more alike than me and the Gen Z, whatever, digital native. Yeah. Let's say that at the very least. And Leigh Anne kind of somewhere in between us.
I'm like 2 years younger than you.
Okay. All right. Yeah, but I got a few more gray hairs. So let's just say that. Okay, before we wrap up this episode, let's get into the lightning round. Leigh Anne, I think you're gonna like this one. Favorite Christmas tradition. Leigh Anne, we've got about 10 minutes. So I don't know. I know you've got a whole list of them, but tell us what your favorite Christmas tradition is.
I like to go to Diker Heights, which is a neighborhood in South Brooklyn where the houses go all out with the Christmas decorations. And whatever you're picturing when I say the houses go all out, like multiply it by 10.
Well, National Lampoon is what I think of when you say that. But
there are many different companies that like compete for their business. The house's business is down there. Tourists go, people come from all over just to go to Diker Heights and look at the Christmas decorations. I'm going this weekend. It's an event. It's so fun. And it's also one of the only times that people really go to South Brooklyn. It's one of the only times I go to South Brooklyn. And my other favorite thing about it is that it's off of the subway line that I live on. So it's like the one time a year something is happening that's like actually more convenient to me than a lot of my friends.
I have to ask, because this is where my head goes. What does that do to the real estate market there? I mean, if you want to buy a house in that neighborhood, you must have to sign on to doing this Christmas light thing.
I think that's true. I'll also say some of the houses do like Hanukkah. It's not like an exclusive. It's not exclusionary in that sense. I will say if you can afford to buy a house anywhere in New York City, but especially these houses in Diker Heights, like they're not small. And I think you guys would agree, even with your Midwest standards. These are big houses in Brooklyn. So
Midwest
people there,
we'll unpack that on a different call. Our Midwest standards. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I like with land and like I'm different than they're not like co-ops. Anyway, so people there are either wealthy or were born into the Christmas tradition, the decorating tradition. So that's really, it's not, I don't think it's a concern.
I wonder if the people are like offering them a lot of money to buy their house just because they want to get in on the Christmas lights. But I might be overthinking this.
Yeah, I don't know much about the real estate in that sense.
Sorry, my Midwest standards kicked in.
I'm from Ohio. Anyway.
Yeah, you have some Midwest bona fides. I'll give you that.
What I'm saying is like I can picture like what I considered a big house when I lived in Ohio or even Phoenix, and these are big houses. They're not
New York big houses.
They're big.
Different.
Yeah.
Understood. That makes sense. This is not your Home Alone brownstone. Let's just put it that way. Okay. Alicia, what's your favorite Christmas tradition?
Well, I've got 3.
Okay.
One, we have this cavern system under the city of Louisville. And every year, the city of Louisville decorates it with just millions of lights, and you can drive through it. And so my son always gets on either my wife or I's lap, whoever's driving, and pretends to drive. And it's really, really cool. We did that over the weekend. And 2, it's called
Hold on, what's going underground in Kentucky? Like,
yeah, I don't get it. I'm also from Ohio, so I don't get that.
Caverns and caves in Kentucky. But anyway,
we've got some cave systems.
You think people driving one-handed with food in the other hand is dangerous?
You could probably get away with that under the cave.
Driving in caverns is a different thing.
He loves it. Yeah, he's getting a little too big to do it. Like this was probably the last year that we'll do the lap, so he was sticking us out of the sunroof and things like that. So that was fun. 2, I really love our Drinkton Live that we do here at NRN.
Coming up soon.
And that's a new favorite tradition because I'm only, I think, on year 2 or 3 of that. And then 3, my family and I always go to a bowl game. And this year won't be as sexy. I don't know where we're going as 7-5 Michigan, but I don't care because we just beat Ohio State again. But last year we took the kid out to the Rose Bowl and won in overtime. It was one of the greatest days of my entire life. And my kid had his shirt off and was waving it around, and it was literally everything. The year before that, we were in Arizona. We lost to TCU. So we do that every year as well. We make that a priority. It's after Christmas, we start packing.
That's a good one too. All right. Well, to stay in that theme, lights, of course, love to drive around the neighborhoods that have the lights here in Columbus too. I'll say the Columbus Zoo, one of the best zoos in the world. They put on an incredible light show through the month of December. I hope we're probably going to go to that this week. Lots of fun to walk around the zoo at nighttime with the lights. But I mean, I'll also say just Christmas movies. My kids are now at the age where we're introducing them to Christmas movies. They are big fans of Home Alone now, which is just like makes my heart warm. Still working on them for Muppets Christmas Carol. I don't know why. For whatever reason, they're really opposed to Muppets. It's bizarre. Die Hard might give it a few more years before we get to Die Hard. But Christmas movies, last night we watched The Grinch, the newer version of The Grinch, actually surprisingly good, would recommend. But anyway, Christmas movies, always a favorite. Elf, another one. I'm a walking cliche over here, but anyway, good movies to watch. That's all we've got for Extra Serving this week. Alicia, Leigh Anne, once again, thanks for joining, and Merry Christmas to everybody. We'll be back next week, but enjoy your holiday season.